You've heard of Oxford Circus, you've heard of Piccadilly Circus, and this is the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus.
Hello and welcome everyone to the third part of my concert series, this time the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. This episode is all about a concert that was a big mystery until the mid-90s because it didn't saw the light of day until 30 years after being recorded. For decades, people wondered about the night rock stars came together to perform at a circus and make an exceptionally eclectic and wonderful late 60s show that wasn't released to a bigger audience until 30 years later. For decades, only pictures told the story of the legendary Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And this video is all about that wonderful and mysterious concert. So if you're new to the channel, hi, my name is Emma. This is the concert series. It's basically a series where I get ready for concerts I wish I could have attended. So all about the most famous concerts from the 60s and 70s. And this time it's about the concert of the Rolling Stones. I am personally a big fan of the Rolling Stones. It's the Rock and Roll Circus by them. And it is such an amazing performance. Per usual, I have the full concert linked down below for you to check it out. And if you want to see how I created this eclectic late 60s circus look and you want to know everything about the mystery of the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, just keep on watching. It's December 11th in 1968 and it's a cold and windy day in Wembley, England. And we're about to see an eclectic group of some of the most fabulous and famous musicians of the time. A lot of people describe the concert we're about to attend as the ultimate late 60s time capsule. And what had actually happened during those 15 hours of the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus remained a secret and a mystery to everyone who wasn't there until the 90s. It's definitely one of the most memorable moments of late 60s rock history, and a very special and unique show. Yet at this point of the night, we'd probably have no idea what we're about to actually witness. So because the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus was all about the whole circus theme, I really wanted to go with that and create a super fun late 60s eclectic look. So for this look, I want to create some kind of freckles with these little crystal stars that I already picked out, and I just want to glue them all over my face. And because this is kind of going to be the standout point of the makeup, I want to keep it kind of more simple with the rest. So all I've done so far was to apply some skin tint just to kind of cover up my blemishes. And now I'm just going to start by using this little fluffy brush, and I'm going to use a silvery color and I'm just going to apply that all over my lid. So in 1968, the Rolling Stones were returning from a period of relative inactivity. It had been almost a year since they released their album, Their Satanic Majesty Request, which I have right up there because it's one of my absolutely favorite albums by them. And that kind of ended their psychedelic phase. So Their Satanic Majesty is a very psychedelic album, which is kind of on brand for the time, because while the Rolling Stones released this record, the Beatles released their very psychedelic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And after these two albums, both bands kind of went a very different direction, with a more stripped down sound. So the next album for the Rolling Stones would be Beggar's Banquet, while the Beatles followed up their Sgt. Pepper album with the classic White Album. So the Rolling Stones wanted to return with a bang, and so they kind of had the idea to do a TV live show where they would perform some of their old songs, some of their new songs, and just kind of make a very loud and interesting comeback. So they had the idea to create a show where they would perform different songs and also invite other musicians to perform. So the Rolling Stones teamed up with Michael Lindsay Hogg, who actually had already done a few movies and films and videos for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. He was a pretty famous director at the time, and he was doing like all of these amazing music videos and music films, and together they kind of came up with the idea to create a circus. So even though the idea was pretty simple, it was something completely new. So basically the idea was to combine classic circus acts with music, and they wanted to have different bands there. So there are actually some old documents that they reached out to different musicians like Led Zeppelin, but in the end that didn't happen. But they still invited a lot of amazing musicians to play with them. And the idea was to kind of switch it up between music acts and classic circus acts. So next up, I'm gonna draw on those classic 60s bows over my eyes. I'm gonna use a kohl eyeliner. They were really popular at the time, and this is just a silvery grayish color. So per usual, I'm kind of foreshadowing what I'm about to do, adding some little spots to orientate, and then I'm just drawing it. So I'm just kind of making them very thick because I want this to be a very dramatic and eclectic look, and also because we're gonna blend it later. Now I'm just gonna do the exact same thing on the other eye. So now I'm gonna use this little round brush to kind of soften this out. So the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus started around 2 p.m. and the show was actually over 15 hours long because there were like camera changes in between, and so there is a ton of footage from that night. However, there's only like 66 minutes that made the final cut, so a lot of what happened that night didn't really ever see the light of day. And in this video, I'm also just gonna focus on the most famous people that were there and the most notable things that happened. However, I'm gonna link the full concert in the description for you because I feel like you should definitely check out and watch the whole thing. It is a wonderful and amazing performance, and like the whole circus, everyone was there, has just such a beautiful energy to it. So yeah, just really take your time, pick a nice evening, sit down, maybe have some friends watch it with you and enjoy an amazing performance. So next up, I'm gonna use this other silver eyeliner. This one is just a lot lighter, and I'm just gonna go over the bows that I already drew. So one of the featured acts to perform kind of early on in the show were The Who. So The Who had just finished a tour and they were in their best shape. And a lot of people argued that their performance at the Rock and Roll Circus was what kind of started off their reputation for being the best live band between the late 60s and the mid 70s. It's also safe to say that their performance of their mini rock opera, A Quick One While He's Away, is probably one of the best performances of the night and probably one of the best performances they ever did. And there's just something so hypnotizing about watching them because there is this energy and they are playing so well. And at that time, The Who was already kind of famous, but no one knew what was about to happen for them because they really became one of the most famous bands ever afterwards. And for me, seeing The Who perform at the Rock and Roll Circus was really eye-opening because it's pretty early on in their career. It was before they released Tommy and all of these big hit songs, but seeing them perform pretty early on in their career in the Rock and Roll Circus, you can already see the potential. So The Who was powerful and cool, and they simply blew the audience away with their amazing performance. I think it's also important to note that Pete Townshend was pretty involved in like the whole Rock and Roll Circus and organizing it and everything. And I think for The Who, this performance really paid off because even though the Rolling Stones were the main act of the show, The Who's performance was probably the best. So since I kind of want to keep it simple with the eye makeup because I don't really want to draw away attention from the crystals that I'm about to glue on my face, I'm just gonna apply some mascara now and not really do anything else to my eyes. So because I really want to go for that doll-like 60s look, I'm gonna use an eyelash foundation and then apply the mascara over that. So another noticeable and wonderful act, and the next one to go on stage, was Mick Jagger's girlfriend of the time, Marianne Faithfull. So Marianne Faithfull and Mick Jagger kind of had a difficult relationship. I don't want to go too much into depth here because it's a very complex topic. However, during that time, both of them were struggling with drug abuse. Yet Marianne Faithfull made one of the most beautiful performances ever. So while all the other bands were going for a very big and theatrical approach with their performance, she just sat down on the floor, really simple, and sang her hit song Something Better. And there is something so beautiful about the way that she just sits there in that long, stunning black dress, and it doesn't really need any sort of show because she's just such a beautiful and amazing musician. There's also an interview with Pete Townshend where he says that when he saw Marianne Faithfull perform that night, he thought he'd never seen something more beautiful than that. And I think that's actually pretty powerful because it really shows that you don't need a big stage show, even though we all love them. But if you have a beautiful talent, you don't really need it. So now I'm just gonna go over this with some regular mascara. So Marianne Faithfull actually is such an inspiration to me. She was such a gorgeous and wonderful person, and I feel like her fashion sense was immaculate. I absolutely love everything that she wore. I want to do a full video on her because she was so special and beautiful with everything that she did. And my haircut is also highly inspired by her. Like whenever I get my haircut, I go in with a picture of her and her haircut because I just really like that. So now it's time to start with the crystals. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna take some eyelash glue and I'm gonna put it on this little porcelain thing that I have. And then I'm just gonna dip the crystals in and put them on my face. So I kind of want to alternate between these bigger ones and the smaller ones that I have. But I'm gonna start by taking some big purple ones and just putting them on the outsides right here. So now I'm just gonna use the smaller ones, the silver ones, as well as the purple ones, and I'm just gonna apply them in kind of that area. So pretty much everywhere where I have freckles. So Marianne Faithfull was followed by what is probably the most legendary act of the night, called the Dirty Mac. If you've never heard of the Dirty Mac before, don't worry. They only existed for one night, one performance at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. They only played that one time, but the band consisted of the most famous musicians at the time, and all of them playing together made for an exceptionally legendary performance. Performing his Beatles song from the White Album, John Lennon founded the group. And this was a really big moment because John Lennon hadn't had performed since one of his concerts with the Beatles in 1966. So for him to go on stage in 1968 with a complete different set of musicians and not the Beatles was kind of foreshadowing of what was about to happen between him and the Fab Four. So on the lead guitar, Eric Clapton was performing with him. The legendary band Cream had just broken up and Eric Clapton played this performance with John Lennon, and I think it's kind of ironic because usually the lead guitarist performing with John Lennon was George Harrison, and now he was performing with Eric Clapton on the lead guitar, and Eric Clapton later would go on to marry George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. So that's kind of ironic on its own. But needless to say, Eric Clapton is one of the most talented and amazing guitarists there have ever been, and for him to perform with John Lennon was pretty legendary and wonderful. So on the drums, Mitch Mitchell was playing, who was part of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And on the bass guitar was the Rolling Stones' own Keith Richards. And I'm gonna be real with you here. This was probably one of the most amazing performances ever, and this is one of the performances that makes me the saddest that I wasn't there, because the idea of Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Mitch Mitchell, John Lennon all together on stage performing Year Blue, which is such an amazing and exceptionally beautiful Beatles song, is just so special, and seeing them perform that on tape is so beautiful and so amazing. And it's one of those moments where I watch something and it's so beautiful that I kind of get so sad and so heavy-hearted that I wasn't there. And this was also obviously one of the performances people were most curious about, because they saw pictures of these musicians perform together at the Rock and Roll Circus. However, there was no footage of it because the film wasn't released until the mid-90s, so people were so curious about all of this. So after Year Blue, the performance turned rather strange when John Lennon's fiancée Yoko Ono came to the stage along with a fiddlist, and they started to perform a song called A Whole Lotta Yoko, which John Lennon came up with the name. It was kind of a play on Led Zeppelin's A Whole Lotta Lover, but the whole song is kind of strange, to be honest, because it pretty much just was some high-pitched noises on the violin and then Yoko Ono doing something between screaming and very high and weird noise made up words singing with it. So, as said before, the fact that John Lennon rather took the stage with some other musicians and not the Beatles was pretty foreshadowing of what was about to happen, especially him taking the stage with the Rolling Stones, which the whole topic of the feud between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, which wasn't really there because it was mainly made up by the media, is a whole new topic on its own. But basically the fact that the Beatles had stopped performing live and now John Lennon was going on stage alone or like with a new band really showed that he as an artist was emancipating himself from the Fab Four. So far this look is so fun. I really like it. I think it's really different, but it kind of works great with the whole circus theme. So as you can see, I'm not really evening it out. I'm just trying to be creative with it and find some interesting placings, and I'm not trying to make this side look like this side. I'm just trying to create an overall nice look. So then it was finally time for the Rolling Stones to take the stage. At this point it was already 2 a.m, so basically 12 hours after the concert had started. And all of the members were pretty exhausted, so all of them were either overtired or pretty much high on drugs. So another reason why I chose this concert and why I really would have loved to be there live that night was because performing at the Rock and Roll Circus was actually the last Rolling Stones performance with Brian Jones ever. So during the performance, Brian Jones seems pretty far away. It kind of seems like he's only physically there and not really emotionally, and you can kind of see that he's already pretty detached from the whole band. And I feel like you can also tell that he's definitely high on something, and his drug abuse had gotten really bad by 68. And even though he probably wasn't really mentally there, he played pretty well. He was such a big musical talent, but you can kind of really see that at this point he and the Rolling Stones had really estranged from each other. And to me that is so sad, because Brian Jones is one of my favorite Rolling Stones members, and I gotta admit, I really love the early Rolling Stones albums, and I think a big part of that is because I really like Brian Jones' music and how he written and composed music, and how he also brought something very different and new to the Rolling Stones and their music. And I think him leaving was good for the Rolling Stones because they couldn't take all of his drug abuse and everything anymore. And I also feel like at this point the dynamic of the band were pretty off because there was a lot of tension because of Brian Jones. However, focusing on their music, I think Brian Jones brought a lot to the table. So yeah, I don't really want to get in too much into the whole topic of rock stars, drug abuse, and who should cut ties with whom, because I wasn't there. I have no idea. I don't know these people personally. I don't want to judge anyone over their substance abuse problems or anything. It is bad, obviously, but I feel like there's always something going on behind that. There's always something triggering it. But I just really think there was something very special to the early Rolling Stones, and they kind of lost a part of that when Brian Jones left the band. Okay, so I really love how the stars and everything are looking. I kind of feel like that's a good amount and I don't want to add any more to it. So I'm gonna heat my straightener now to do the hair, and while this is heating up, I'm gonna tell you everything about the Rolling Stones' own performance at the Rock and Roll Circus. I also want to add a tiny bit of lipstick because I kind of don't like how pale my lips are looking. So the overall performance of the Rolling Stones was pretty okay, but it wasn't as exceptionally good as they were before, and they would definitely go on to play many way better shows than their performance at the Rock and Roll Circus. So the Rolling Stones performance was mainly carried by Mick Jagger's big enthusiasm and probably drug use. So the whole band was pretty exhausted and probably kind of high on drugs. So this really wasn't their best performance, and that is also what kind of really played a huge role in why the movie wasn't released for such a long time. So basically, looking at their performance, it's a good performance, but it's not nearly as phenomenal as some of the shows they played before and they would go on to play. So I feel like obviously after waiting 12 hours to perform, they were absolutely exhausted. They were kind of on a weird point with Brian Jones at the time, and I feel like there was so much pressure on them to make that big comeback that the performance kind of was more okay than it really was phenomenal or as amazing as The Who's performance, for example. Overall, I feel like the idea of the Rock and Roll Circus was so amazing, and if their performance would have been as phenomenal as they probably planned it to be, this would have been the peak of their career. But I feel like the odds kind of weren't in their favor that night, and they just weren't as good. And I feel like that is something people tend to forget with live music. Not every show is going to be as amazing as it gets. The people performing are just humans, and they have bad days, and they have days where maybe they're tired or they're exhausted, and so you can't really expect them to be as amazing every single performance. However, I feel like it's kind of sad because they put so much work and effort into the Rock and Roll Circus, and they really wanted this to be their big break and their big comeback. So it's kind of sad to see that it didn't work out that way. However, their performance is absolutely legendary, and seeing them perform in that whole circus setting is still really, really beautiful. So because I'm gonna wear a hat, which I'm gonna show you later, I'm not really gonna do anything to my hair, but I'm gonna style these little pieces that I have. As said before, I kind of get my haircuts inspired by Miss Marianne Faithfull, and she had these two little things. They were super popular in the 60s, and I'm just gonna use my straightener to kind of whip them in a bit more. So why wasn't this released until the mid-90s? So there are actually a few different reasons why the Rock and Roll Circus didn't really saw the light of day until the 90s. But the biggest one was that the Rolling Stones withdrew it because they weren't really happy with their performance. You can kind of see that they're high on something and that they're absolutely exhausted, and they wanted this to be their big comeback, and it just wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. However, parts of the footage showed up in the 1979 documentary The Kids Are Alright about The Who, and that kind of even made the myth about the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus even bigger, because now people saw scenes of that and they were like, well, what about the rest? What about everything else that happened that night? But despite the Rolling Stones being not too happy with their performance, the film finally saw the light of day in 1969 at the New York Film Festival. Which, if you've never been to the New York Film Festival, that's a big tip right here by me. If you're into movies, go there. They got great movies. It's an amazing festival. So I feel like in conclusion, it's safe to say that the show featured a lot of different acts, some of them being exceptionally amazing like The Who, and some of them kind of being rather strange like Yoko Ono and John Lennon. However, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus is a real time capsule concert. It really takes you back to that late 60s eclectic music scene, and with its amazing flair and the whole mystery about it, it's definitely a true and important piece of rock and roll history. So as said before, I'm gonna put on a hat now, and I actually have a very special hat to go with this look. So I really wanted to go with the classic circus theme by going with a top hat. And to some of you, getting your hand on a real vintage top hat would probably be a difficult task. For me, it was pretty easy because my dad actually is a magician, so he has a whole collection of top hats, and I went over to his house a couple of days ago and picked this one out because it is so beautiful. But let me show you this one. It actually comes in this gorgeous box. Then you kind of open it up like so. I just really want to be careful with this, but as you can see, it lays in there. And then classic top hats are foldable. I don't know if you guys know this, because I grew up with a magician around me, so all of these things seem kind of normal to me, but I don't know how much other people know about this. Yeah, it is so beautiful. As you can see, it kind of has this golden detailing in there. Just so gorgeous. And then all you gotta do is to push it up. There we go. Beautiful classic vintage top hat. So this really finishes up the look perfectly. I really like how this is looking. I think it is perfect for that 60s eclectic circus look. And I'm gonna put in some shots now so you can properly see the finished result. So now that we're ready, it's time to go. It's time to see the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And I feel like at this point, we would be so excited, however, we would have no idea what we're about to witness. and that we would be about to attend a performance that would be so special and wondered about for the next 30 years. And we would just be ready right now without a single clue about what was about to happen. So that's it for today's video. That's it for this part of the concert series featuring the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe share this video with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would mean a lot. If you've ever been to a Rolling Stones concert, or by some chance you've been there the night of the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, please leave a comment down below and share your experience with all of us, because I really love to read about concerts, and you sharing your story with me would mean the world. Please also leave a comment down below suggesting more concerts. I am doing this concert series pretty regularly right now, and I'm working on some of the most amazing concerts of rock and roll music history, so if you have any suggestion, make sure to leave them down below for me. If you're interested in all things 60s and 70s, the people, the music, the makeup, and just everything else, make sure to subscribe to my channel because I upload multiple videos every single week all about that, and I would love to have you around. I hope you're having an amazing day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye guys!